Hey, this is MJ, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make a chunky hooded granny stitch cardigan. It's going to be button up, have pockets, it's going to have the hood, and it's crocheted in this beautiful chunky yarn. That I'm using is Marvelous Chunky from Mary Maxim. It's a bulky weight number 5, and the color that I'm using is Sweet Stuff, and this is 100% acrylic. There are 270 yards on a 200 gram or 7 ounce ball. And I will have the link in the description box on where to purchase the yarn. I'll be using 2 hook sizes for this pattern, so I'm working with a 10 millimeter as well as a 6.5 millimeter crochet hook. And these are streamline hooks from Furls Crochet, as well as the hook tray, and I will have links in the description box for these as well. So we're going to begin by making a pocket, and this will serve as a gauge swatch, so you can check your gauge to make sure you're on track so your sizing comes out correctly. So I'll be starting with my larger hook. Let's make a slip knot. And I'm going to begin with a chain of 16. Okay, so I have 16 chains. Now in the second chain from the hook, I'm going to just flip my work so I can see those little back bumps. We're going to work into them. So here's the first one that we're going to work into, and you're going to make a single crochet. You're going to work across into those back bumps. Now, if you're really struggling, you can still work into the back of the chain, but this is just going to give you that nicer edge along the bottom. So as long as your chain isn't too tight, you should be able to work into them. Sometimes when your chain is tight, it makes it more difficult to get into that back bump. So as you work across this, you should have a total of 15 stitches. And there's the last one right here. Okay, so this is going to be the width of the pocket. If for any reason you wanted to make it a little bit wider than this, if you wanted a bigger pocket, you would need to do another 4 stitches on top of the 15. So you would need to go up to 19. So I'm going to chain 3, turn, and the chain 3 will count as my first stitch. I'm going to work a double crochet in the next stitch and the next stitch. Then I'll chain 1, skip a stitch, and a double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in the next 3. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, skip a stitch, and double crochet in the next 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is how our first row is going to look. Chain 4, turn. Now we're going to skip over and we want to work into the first chain one space. We're going to be working 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3. So that makes our first cluster. Chain 1, 3 double crochet in the next chain one space, chain 1. Our next cluster will be in the next chain one space. So 3 double crochets will be referred to as clusters. Chain 1, and then we'll have a double crochet in the turning chain right here. We'll chain 3, turn, and in our first chain one space, we're going to work 2 double crochets. Chain 1, cluster in our next chain one space, whoops, chain 1, cluster in the next chain one space, chain 1, and then we'll work a cluster in the turning chain. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then we're going to be repeating these 2 rows for our pattern. So we'll chain 4 and work our cluster in the first chain one space. Chain 1. Chain 1, and in our turning chain we'll work a double crochet. Chain 3, and in that first space we'll work 2 double crochet, chain 1, cluster in the next chain one space, chain 1. Okay, and in the chain 4 we're going to do another cluster, okay, so when you end with a cluster, the next row you need to chain 4 and turn. So let's see this pocket here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cluster rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I just need to do 1 more and then I'll meet you up for the next step. So now to measure out for your gauge, you are going to want to take, I like to take one of my full clusters. So this is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stitches in 4 inches. So we don't have quite a full next cluster. We're counting our chain 1 spaces as only 1 stitch. Even though it kind of pulls it across, this is how we're going to do the gauge swatch. And then we have about 1, 2, 3, 4.5 rows. And now what we're going to do is you can change over to your smaller hook if you want, or you can continue with the larger for this. It's not as big of a deal. I like to keep my stitch a little bit maybe looser if I'm going down to this hook, just so that we don't pull this in too tight. And we're going to single crochet, and we're single crocheting in the chain one space. 1, 2, 3, 1 in the chain one space, 1, 2, 3, 1 in the chain one space, 1, 2, 3, and then we would have 1 for the chain one space, and then 1 for the top of the chain. Okay, so you start with 2, end with 2, and we're just doing sort of a border on the top of the pocket, just in single crochet stitches. You can see that we're getting this fun color change throughout this yarn. Chain 1 and turn. So this is row 3, and we want to do 4 rows. And you're going to want to make 2 pockets, and then just set them aside for the end. Okay, so I've completed my 4th row, and now what you want to do is make sure to pull off a long string of yarn. So what I like to do is go at least double of, I'm going to use this tail to sew the pocket on, so we'll be sewing down the side, down the bottom, up. So I like at least double for doing that. So we can fasten that off. So then you only need to weave in this tail, and you have this one ready when it's time to sew on those pockets. So like I say, looking at my hand, this is a good size pocket, but if you want to go bigger, that's okay. Just add an additional cluster, which would be an additional 4 stitches to this. Let's just talk a little bit about the gauge again. So let's say that you're not meeting the pattern gauge. So what do you do in that case? So if you have too many stitches, so let's say if you measure this out, you're getting this cluster, this cluster, this cluster all in. So you're actually getting 11 stitches instead of 10. You'll want to use a bigger hook or loosen up your stitch, loosen up your tension so that you only have 10. Now the other way would be, okay, let's say you have 9 instead of 10. Then you're going to have to maybe go down a hook size or tighten up your tension. And this can be affected by the yarn, sometimes even from color to color in a yarn line, the thicknesses can change. So you may need to adjust your tension or your hook size to make sure you meet the gauge. And also when you're working between colors, it's important to also check your gauge between colors, just because you will find that there's sometimes a little bit of a difference. But just loosening up your tension or changing your hook size can correct any issues that you're having. Definitely making sure that this gauge is on track is just going to make sure the sizing comes out to what I have listed in the pattern. We're going to begin with the larger hook. Put a slip knot on your hook, and I'll begin with a chain of 44. Once you have your 44 chains, I want you to find the second chain from the hook and then turn your work so you can see these back bumps along the chain, and you're going to work in 2. So here's the second chain, turn, you're going to see that bump, and you're going to work through just like we did on the pocket. So you're going to work across that chain in the back bumps so that we have a total of 43 stitches. And just make sure that you do have the correct stitch count so that your next step lines up correctly. Okay, so I've worked all the way across. Now we're going to chain 3. I'm going to turn my work and work 3 double crochets in the first stitch. I'm going to chain 1, I'm going to skip the next stitch, and then I'm going to work a V stitch in the next stitch. So to work a V, we're going to double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. I'm going to chain 1, I'm going to skip the next stitch, and I'm going to work a double crochet in the next 3. I'm going to chain 1, I'm going to skip the next stitch, and then double crochet in the next 3. So this here is our front panel, our V stitch separates, then our sleeve, chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then we're working another V stitch, which will separate our sleeve from our back. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, skip the next stitch, a double crochet in the next 3, chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next 3, so we're repeating our double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch 3 times. And that's going to give you a total of 4 clusters across the back. So I've got 3, need to do it one more time. So chain 1, skip a stitch, and then we have another V stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Chain 1, skip a stitch. So we're working our repeat, so it's 3 double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, and we're repeating it one more time for the sleeve. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and now we're going to work a V. Chain 1, skip a stitch, and in our last stitch we will be working 4 double crochets. Okay, so I just like to take a look at this now with you, just so you can make sure you're on track. So we've got our first cluster for the front panel. We have a V-stitch, 2 clusters, a V-stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, another V-stitch, 1, 2 for our next sleeve, a V-stitch, and then our final cluster for our other front panel. So now for row 2, which is going to be an increase, we're going to chain 3. And we're going to work 3 double crochet in between the space between this double crochet and the second double crochet. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to chain 1, going to skip over this cluster and work 3 double crochets. Chain 1, and now we're to a V-stitch, and we're going to place a V in the V-stitch. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, and in the chain 1 space, we're going to work 3 double crochet, which is our cluster, chain 1, and we're going to do that in every space until we reach the V. So this again is our repeat. So we repeat each section the same. So when you're reading the pattern, it's going to say cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space to V-stitch, V-stitch, in V-stitch, chain 1, and you're going to repeat that around because it's repeated for each section. So cluster, chain 1, cluster in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, and we're to a V. So we're now putting our V-stitch in the V, chain 1, and then we're going to do the same thing across the next section. Cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space. I'll meet you up at the next V. So I've worked my chain 1, here's my V, and we'll work a V-stitch in the V-stitch. Chain 1, cluster chain 1 in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, work that across to the next V-stitch. So I've worked my chain 1, here's my V, and we'll work a V-stitch in the V-stitch. Chain 1, cluster chain 1 in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, work that across to the next V-stitch. I've chained 1, so we're working a V in the V. Chain 1, cluster, chain 1, and now in the turning chain we're going to work 4 double crochet. So in that space between our DC and chain. So now let's take a look how it's looking, and let's count out our clusters. And if you purchase the PDF, I do have a chart that's going to tell you exactly for each row how many clusters you're going to have and how many in total, and that is helpful to keep you on track. So we have 2 and then a V, 1, 2, 3, and then a V, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the V. So you can see we're going up 1 cluster for this section, 1 cluster for this section, 1 cluster for this section. So you should have the same over here. So 1, 2, 3 for this sleeve now, V stitch, and then ending with 2 clusters. So in total, you should have now 15 for this round. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 clusters. So now for this round, we're going to chain 4. And we're skipping over our first cluster. We're working a cluster. Cluster chain 1. So now we're beginning that repeat. So cluster chain 1 to the V. Chain 1, we get to the V. We're going to work a V in our V stitch. So now this time you should only have 2 clusters. Okay, so there's no increase here, just 2 clusters. And then we're going to chain 1 and we're going to start our repeat again. So cluster chain 1 to the next V stitch. 1, 2, 3, chain 1. I've chained 1. Here's my next V stitch. We'll work a V. And this pattern is so repetitive once you get into it. It's going to work up so quick in the chunky yarn. So chain 1, and then we're back into the repeat here with our cluster chain 1 to the next V. Cluster, chain 1. Okay, I've already chained 1 and I'm working my V, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, and I'm going to work my cluster chain 1 over to my next V stitch. Chain 1, here's my next V stitch, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, and a cluster in the first chain 1 space. Chain 1, cluster in the next. Chain 1, and we'll be adding a double crochet in that turning chain. And then I'm going to chain 3 and turn. Okay, so now you should have 2 clusters here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 for the next sleeve and 2 for the front. And now for this row, we're going to be working our cluster in our first chain 1 space. Chain 1, cluster in the next, chain one, and cluster in the next. Chain one, work in the V. So this is all just repetitive at this point from what I've been showing you. So I'm going to get you to work all the way around to the end, and then I'll meet you up again. Okay, so we're ending with, so I've chained one, we're ending with 4 double crochet in that final chain 4 space. Okay, and then now we're just going to be repeating rows 3 and rows 4 until you get to the size that you're working on. You're working a total of 9 rows. So let's just start out. So we're alternating between that chain 4 row and the starting cluster row. So we'll chain 4. You skip over the cluster and work your cluster, but you can rewind the video and go over rows 3 and 4 again, because it's just going to continue the same way. So this row, this row will have 3 clusters. This row's 3 clusters, this row's 3 clusters, and then the next one will go up to 4. And we're working a V in the V stitch. So I'm going to work up my yoke now off camera. So I want to get a total of 9 rows for this size. Okay, so I have been working away on my yoke, and I have worked a total of 9 rows. So my front panel has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clusters. My sleeves have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. My back has 12. So the sleeve has 10, and then this front panel has 5. So now what we're going to do is chain 3. I'm going to turn and continue with my pattern to the V stitch. So I'm going to work 3 doubles, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 across to the V. Okay, so I've worked to the V, so I've crocheted my last cluster, I've chained 1, and now we're skipping the sleeve section. So you need to go right across to the next V stitch, and then we're going to continue with our cluster, chain 1 in that first chain 1 space after the V. And now we're going to do our cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space across to the next V. So we're working across the entire back. Okay, so I'm coming up to my next V. I've worked my cluster in the last chain 1 space. I've chained 1, and now we're going to skip this sleeve. So we're skipping over the sleeve section. You're finding the V stitch, and in the next chain 1 space, we'll work a cluster, chain 1. Okay, and then I'm going to work that across, and we'll be ending our last cluster in our chain 4. Okay, so I finished with my last cluster. In total, I have 25 clusters. And now I'm going to chain 4. Skipping over the first cluster, working a cluster, chain 1 across. Cluster, chain 1. And you're going to work, so this is the underarm section. Right here, you're going to work a cluster in this chain 1 space as you work across. So each chain 1 space, you'll end up with a cluster there as well. So I'm going to work all the way across in my cluster chain 1. Okay, so I've worked across 24 clusters, chain 1, and work a double crochet in the turning chain, chain 3. And we're just going to be working back and forth in rows now in our established pattern. So we're alternating, starting with the chain 4 and then with a cluster. Sort of how we've been doing it since finishing the increase. Okay, so 3 doubles, chain 1, and then our cluster chain 1 across. And you're going to end with 4 double crochet stitches. Okay, so I'm going to work this all the way across. So I'm ending in the chain 4, and I have a total of 25 clusters. And now you're just going to continue working in rows until it is the length that you would like. I will pop up directions for how many rows to do for the long cardigan, but you could make it crop if you want. You can do it really whatever length you want. So chain 4, skip your first cluster, cluster chain 1 in the next chain 1 space, and just continue working, alternating these rows. Okay, so I've been working on the body of the cardigan, and I've decided for this sweater, I'm going to do it a crop length so that this way I can show you how your sweater can look a little different depending on the length you choose. So the blue cardigan shows the long version, and this is going to show you a crop version of the sweater. So I have worked an additional 10 rows from my yoke. So if you count your clusters from the very top, if that makes it easier for you, you're going to have a total of 19. Now for the long version, instead of working an additional 10 rows, you're going to work an additional 20. So then you would have a total of 29 rows from the top. But you can play around with the length. You don't have to do it exactly. If you follow the pattern, I just have the yarn amounts worked out for these particular sizes and styles. So you should be ending on the wrong side of your work. And there's also one other little difference between the two versions. So if you're working the longer version and you don't want the waistband or that bottom band pulling in, We're going to do it a little differently than if you're working the long version. So the long version, we want to work across in every stitch. So here's a stitch, our chain 1 is a stitch, and then each stitch of the cluster. So 1 stitch for every stitch and chain 1 space across. Now for the shorter version, I do want my waist pulling in because this is quite oversized. But if you were doing hip length and you wanted the waistband not to pull in, go again with the way I've done the long version. So I'm going to single crochet in the first stitch. So I'm now on my right side. I'm going to skip the chain 1 and I'm going to work a single crochet into each stitch. Skip the chain 1, work a single crochet in each stitch. Skip, skip the chain 1, and I'm going to work that all the way across. If you want to pull it in even tighter than what I'm doing, you can always skip more stitches, but you can see it is going to give it a nice pull, especially going with the smaller hook, which is what I'm using. Okay, so once you get all the way, 1, 2, 3, I'm counting up 3 chains because we'll be single crocheting in the 3rd chain of our chain 4, so that we're skipping the 1, chain 1 in turn, and you need to work an odd number for the band so that you end on the right side. So I'm going to do 5 rows, but this also you can easily alter. I'm going to go ahead and work up 5. You're just working single crochets through each stitch. Just a simple single crochet band. Okay, so I finished 5 rows and I tried it on just to make sure that I was happy. And it seems like if you try yours on and feel like it's maybe too tight, remember we are going to be adding the collar to both sides, so it's going to be an additional width as well added to your front panels. So I tried it on, I'm liking how it's looking, and I also want to just remind you that when you're working with bulky yarns, they do tend to stretch out over time because it's a heavier cardigan, and the stitches can, because they're not super tight, you do have a lot more stretch to them, as you can see. So I find they do tend to stretch out. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about length, that over time, usually it will give a little bit of stretch. Okay, so to work the collar, I love not fastening off if I ever don't have to. If you fastened off here and join back on, just put a slip knot on your hook, join in. All this does is eliminate some extra tails to weave, which I'm always thrilled to avoid. So if you can continue, all you want to do is chain 1 and then just continue working up the side. If you've slip stitched in to join, you can chain 1 as well. And what we're going to do is work a single crochet, and I'm using my smaller hook, a single crochet per row. So we did 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then what I'm going to do is 2 per cluster row. So 1, 2, 1, 2. And I'm just going to continue around the cardigan doing this. Okay, it works out really well. And what I'm going to do is show you, if you're working the hood, what to do, and if you're not, I'm going to pull back that hood and show you how to complete it without it. And this gives you that flexibility to have a hood or not have a hood, whatever you prefer. Okay, so I unfortunately lost one of my video clips and I didn't realize it until after the fact. So I'm going to just show you how you're going to join on for the hood. So I've already worked this collar, but this right here was that initial foundation row. So we had a total of 43 stitches, if you remember, at our foundation. So what you're doing is you're joining right into our top right side. I'm just going to use this as the collar edge that would be here. So you're joining in with a slip stitch into that first stitch of the collar, the foundation row, and you're going to chain 4. So the chain 4 is going to count as our double crochet and our chain 1. Okay, so this is the same number of stitches that we have in our collar. We're skipping the first stitch as well as the next stitch, and then we're going to work a double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet in the next 3. And my video will pick back up. It was just this clip that was missed. But I wanted to make sure that you were able to get it started. Chain 1, skip a stitch, work a double crochet in the next 3. So we're going to repeat this. It is a little tight working into those, but it's still doable. Chain 1, skip a stitch. So repeat this all the way around, and I'll meet you up at the end. Okay, so you should be ending as you come here with only 2 stitches. So we're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then work a double crochet in the last stitch. We're going to chain 3, and then we're going to get started into our cluster pattern. So in the chain 1 space, we're going to work 3 double crochets. Okay, chain 1, skip our 3 doubles, and in the next chain 1 space, cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space across. Okay, so I'm going to work that all the way across. Okay, so I am approaching the end. I've chained 1. I'm going to skip the 3 double crochets, and then we're going to work 4 double crochets in that final space. Okay, so this is going to be repetitive from how we were working the body. You're going to continue back and forth in rows for the hood if you're making one. So the next row, you're going to chain 4 and work your cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space across. Okay, just like this. And then when you get all the way to the end. Here you're going to chain one and do a double crochet between that last double and our turning chain, our chain here. So right in between there, just like what we were doing with the body. So now, because I'm not going to do the hood on this one, I'm going to pull this back, and you're going to work a total of 14 rows for the hood. So you're ending on the wrong side. And once you get that complete and you end on your wrong side of your work, you're going to fasten off with a long tail, and you're just going to seam the hood together. So right now I have my right side out. So what you would do at this point is to seam the hood, you're going to fold it. Okay, it's obviously going to be much longer, but you're going to fold the hood like this. Then you're just going to take your long tail and your yarn needle, and you're just going to seam that across. And I like to just match up my clusters, my chain one spaces, and seam it so that it's nice and even. Seam that across, weave in your tail. So I'm not going to walk you through that step because it's pretty straightforward. But I wanted to show you on camera just how to do the hood so you're not confused if you're following along with the written directions. So I'm going to pull this back. Actually, I might leave this a bit. I'm going to leave this when I do the edging. I'm just going to show you as if you were doing the hood, how to continue the edging around the hood. So I will leave this attached for now, just so I can give you a little demo on that as well. Okay, so I'm coming up to the start of where I started my hood. So if you are doing the hood, what I would suggest is putting a single crochet into that foundation row. And then once you get into the hood, you're going to have rows again where it's the same as you're working along here. So 2 per each cluster row. And you're just going to continue that all the way around the hood, and you will end up, okay, you're going to go around. You obviously don't want to do this until your hood is seamed together, and then you'll just continue working it all the way down. So what I'm going to do now is, because I'm to the hood and we don't want a hood on this one, I'm going to pull this back, and I am just going to roll off these rows that I've made, and I'll show you how to continue without the hood. Okay, so I'm going to add my 2 in the last row. I'm going to stick another single crochet to the side here as well for that foundation row. And then I'm going to get working in each stitch across the foundation row. And I'm going to just crochet over that tail as I go, just to save a bit of weaving. Okay, so I'm just going to single crochet per stitch around our neck. Okay, I've worked to this side, so I'm going to do 1 single crochet for the foundation row, and then I'm going to get into doing 2 per row all the way down, and doing 1 per single crochet row once I get to the band. Okay, so once you get to the end, we're going to chain 1 and turn, and I'm going to work another row before I mark out for buttonholes, because the buttonholes won't start till row 3. So I'm going to do another full row, and then I'll meet you back up to show you how I mark out the buttonholes. And it's the same process for whatever length you're working with. You just want to evenly space them, and I like to put stitch markers to just mark where I'm going to put those buttons, and I make sure that I have the same amount of stitches between each buttonhole. I'm just going to continue working row 2 and then I'll meet you back up again. Okay, so I have spaced out my buttons. On my longer cardigan, I had some more of these larger buttons, but I didn't have enough for this cardigan. So the ones that I'm using are a little bit smaller. I can measure these ones for you. I think they're 40 millimeter. So depending on the size button you use, you may need to adjust your buttonhole size. So yes, these ones are a 40 millimeter and these ones are a 35 millimeter. So I didn't use as many. 1, 2, 3, 4. I did 5 of the larger buttons on the long cardigan and I spaced them out probably a little bit more than I'm doing this one. So I'm only going to do a chain 1, skip 1 stitch for this size button because the buttonhole with 2 stitches with the 40 mil fit well and wasn't even overly tight. So I think if you did a chain 2, skip 2 stitches for a 35 millimeter, the button isn't going to stay done up. So this is where you can easily modify your buttonhole based on the button that you choose, but I would go with at least a 35 millimeter for this pattern, especially with how chunky this sweater is. So I'm going with 4 buttons. Now you could do only 3 and space them out differently. It's really up to you how you space them. Don't feel like you have to do it exactly as I'm showing you. The idea is that you learn how to make the buttonhole and then you can play with it. So that just got pulled back. So what we're going to do now is chain 1 and turn. I'm going to single crochet 2 before I start my buttonhole, and then for the buttonhole, which I've marked with a stitch marker, I'm going to chain 1, I'm going to skip that stitch, and then I'm going to single crochet into the next stitch. And so whenever I reach the marker, I'm just going to chain 1, skip 1. And you can always check to make sure that this will fit your button. So mine goes through, so I'm not going to have an issue. Chain 1, skip. And I just would make sure that you're not doing that chain too tight to make it small. If you, I guess, wanted a smaller button, if you tried to make that really tight, that might help tighten it up enough for a bit smaller button. So I'm going to continue this around. I'll chain 1, skip 1 for every mark. Also didn't tell you, so I did 9 stitches between my markers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so I started on row 4 and I've come to those buttonholes. Take your markers out if you want. Leaving them there also helps to show you when you're coming to that chain 1. So when you come to the chain 1 buttonhole, you're just going to single crochet into it. Continue working. And you're on your wrong side at this point, so we have one more row to do, which will put us ending on our right side. Okay, so I'm just going to continue working that across, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish my last row. Okay, so once you've finished your 5th row, you can fasten off. You can weave in your tails. And when it comes to attaching the buttonholes, you can mark the rows the exact same so you know exactly where to put the buttonhole. So I started at my 3rd. And then you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and mark the 10th. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Mark the 10th. This will just help me to line up my buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So then you're just going to take a yarn needle that will fit through your buttonholes. And you can evenly line up your button with the stitch marker. This needle is a little snug going through these holes. And what I like to do is just knot on my buttons and then give those yarn tails a trim. Okay, and you can do that for each marker working up the side. I'm going to show you how to join on and work the sleeve. So I have my right side facing. I'm going to put a slip knot on my hook. And I'm going to go to the underarm. Here is the V-stitch to the right. Here is the V-stitch to the left. Now I also want to make sure I leave a tail or just sewing any gapping at the underarm. So put a slip knot on your hook. We're going to slip stitch into that V stitch to the right. Okay, I'm going to come over and I'm going to slip stitch into the V stitch to the left. Okay, so you can see we have a little bit of a hole here. We're going to leave this tail to the end and we can sew that so that it's not gapping open like that. And now we're going to slip stitch into our first chain 1 space. We're going to chain 3. And I'm going to work 2 double crochet. So I'm making a cluster. The chain 3 counts as our first double, chain 1. And now we're going to work around a cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space. So cluster, chain 1, cluster in the next chain 1 space, chain 1. Okay, so I'm going to work that around and meet you up on the other side. Okay, so I've worked to that last chain 1 space. I've chained 1. I'm going to slip stitch in the chain 3 to join. And then I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to chain 3 and work 2 double crochets in that first space. Chain 1, and in the next chain 1 space, cluster chain 1. And I'm going to work that again all the way around. Okay, so I've worked around to my last 2 chain 1 spaces because we're going to start doing some decreases. And to do a decrease, you're going to yarn over, go in the chain 1 space, pulling up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2, yarn over, going back into the same chain 1 space, pull through 2, and now we're going to yarn over, going into the next chain 1 space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 3, and another double crochet. So we've now combined these 2 spaces, so now there'll be one less cluster on the next round. So this is basically like 1 cluster now instead of 2. So now we'll slip stitch into the chain 3 to join, chain 3 and turn, and for the next 2 rounds we're going to continue just working without any decreases. So cluster chain 1, cluster chain 1. So I'm going to work all the way. So I've worked around 10 clusters. So we started with 11. We're now down to 10. I'm going to slip stitch, chain 3, turn, and we're going to do another round the exact same. So at the 10 clusters, so 2 double crochet, chain 1, cluster chain 1 around. Okay, so I've slip stitched to join, chain 3, turn, we're back to our right side, and we're going to do another decrease, and we're going to do them across the last 2 chain 1 spaces again. So work all the way around until we get to those last 2 chain 1 spaces. Okay, so we're going to work this decrease the same as I've already shown you. So we're going to do a double crochet, pull through 2, yarn over, go to the next chain 1, pull through 2, pull through 3, and a double crochet. Chain 1, slip stitch to join, chain 3, and turn. So we're going to do one more decrease, work another 2 rounds, and then do one more decrease, decreasing down to 8 clusters in total. For this size, you can do more decreases if you want. It's really up to you, but I'm going to decrease this one down to 8 clusters in total. And I'll pop up how many rows I'm doing in total, or rounds I'm doing for my sleeve, but you can alter the sleeve length. You can try it on as you go and do it really as long as you need to. So I'm going to continue now working my sleeves off camera, but I will meet you up to show you once I get my length complete on how to do the cuff. So the cuff for this pattern is a simple single crochet cuff as shown here. Okay, so for the sleeve, I've worked 17 rows, and now you can alter that if you need your sleeve a little bit longer, but I've done 17 and I decreased down to having a total of 8 clusters. So I'm I'm just going to pull this back so I can show you. So I'm going to switch over to my smaller hook. I'm going to slip stitch to join, chain 1, and now I'm going to work a single crochet in our center double crochet, or the first double crochet after our chain 3. I'm going to skip the next double crochet and work a single crochet in our chain 1 space, skip the next double crochet, single crochet, skip the next double crochet, single crochet in the chain 1. And so we're just alternating this. We're skipping every other stitch and working around. Now, if you don't want the cuff this tight, this is a fairly tight cuff, you can always alter this. You could go just working in our 3 stitches and skipping the chain 1. What's nice about this is you can work it up and then try it on to see how you like the fit. Just don't weave in your tail and you can easily pull it back. So you should end up with 16 stitches. We'll slip stitch in our first single crochet to join, chain 1, and I want to keep the cuff consistent with all the other bands we've been working, so a total of 5 rounds. Okay, so I've worked around, and now another thing that you can do is a reverse slip stitch join, and this just makes your join a little bit less noticeable. It's not a huge deal. You can do a regular slip stitch if you need to, but let me show you how to do this. One important thing to remember is we want the yarn to go to the front of our hook. So instead of going like this with the yarn to the back, we want it going to the front. And we're going to go back to front through the stitch, going to yarn under, and now as you pull through, don't try to pull through the loop on the hook right away. You're going to twist your hook and get that you have your yarn pulled up, and then pull through, chain 1. I'm just going to show you that again. I know my daughter was struggling with it, so I was going over showing her how to do it, and sometimes when you're showing someone that's struggling with this type of join, so you want to remember that the yarn needs to be going to the front of that hook, go through, and then you're going to twist away from you. So twist away and don't try to go right through. Get it pulled up so you're nice and comfortable, and then pull through. And we'll chain 1. And continue working around. So finish with 5 rounds. You can fasten off, slip stitch to join, fasten off, and weave in those tails. So one final thing that I said I would show you how to do is seaming under the arm. So just take your yarn needle, put that tail that we left, and you can really easily just stitch this up. You can stitch all of it if you want, or even just part of it, because it is normal to have some space between, but you can very easily stitch up the entire space as well. It's at the underarm, so nobody's gonna know. It's gonna look good either way, and then you can just weave in your tail. Make sure to go one way, go back in the opposite direction to make sure that it is secure. Okay, and then you can just trim your tail. Okay, so I'm not putting the pocket on my shorter cardigan, but I will show you how to put it on the longer one. So just take your yarn needle and you can really position it wherever you want. Depending on the size you're working on, you may want to center it on the front panel. It's nice to kind of try to tie in the clusters maybe of the pocket with the clusters on the panel. And then all I'm going to do is just sew it. So I'm going through part of the cardigan to and I'm just going to work my way down. One thing I should have done is got rid of that tail before I started into this. So I'm just going to keep working it all the way around. You can use your rows as a guide so that you sew it on straight. And just sew each pocket on each side. You could add pockets to the shorter version too, and that looks fine. I just prefer not to add them to mine, so I'm not going to bother doing that. So I just wanted to say, when you're going to the other side to put on your other one, just make sure, like I was 2 cluster rows up from the bottom and 2 from across. So just make sure when you're sewing your other pocket on that you do it the same, and also count up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Make sure you're sewing at the 11th row on this side too. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and tap the bell to stay updated on all my new videos and tutorials. Make sure to click through the description box for links to the pattern and supplies. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome day.